Our next session is a really interesting panel discussion. It's one that's very close to the hearts of the data and analytics community right now. And the topic is the future of data and analytics post-COVID-19. We've got a really terrific panel for you and a great discussion. And we are moderated by Kevin Ross, who is a board member for the New Zealand Data Science and Analytics Forum. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with a distinguished group of leaders in the field. We're going to have a bit of time together just talking about the role of analytics in a post-COVID-19 world, and particularly talk about some stories of how analytics has played a role through the transition to the new future, but also just thinking about the role that analytics is going to play going forward. So let me hand around the room to introduce all of our panel members. Pete, do you want to go first and introduce yourself?
Sure. G'day. Thanks for the intro there, Kevin. Delighted to be here. Peter Gavin's my name. I'm the GM of Data and Analytics at ANZ New Zealand. I've been in the business, I guess, for over 20 odd years. I've been around a few of the larger companies in New Zealand, and I've only recently joined ANZ New Zealand, but I'm really delighted to be here and share my perspectives today. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. David.
Thanks, Kevin. David Thomas. I'm GM of Customer Analytics and Insights at Genesis. Been there coming up for a year. Like Pete, I've spent a lot of time in this field, and I think he and I have followed each other around those larger industries in New Zealand, those larger firms.
Excellent. And Terry?
Yeah, I'm Terry Goodman, Managing Director at Intech Solutions, based here in Sydney, Australia. I started Intech about 25 years ago now, so I pretty much maintained the course. And the majority of our work is all around data projects, data hygiene and data analytics. So we've seen a lot of customer journeys, and specifically in the utilities and government sector. And we currently have quite a good visibility over what a lot of government sites are doing and their views, how they've been affected by the pandemic. So I'll be able to share some of those today.
Excellent. I can see we're going to have a good conversation going forward. So I thought I'd start out the discussion today by just hearing from each of our panelists about their COVID-19 story. So what's analytics been like over the last 18 months within the context of the industry you work in? I'll let Pete go first.
Oh, thank you. I'll do my best. We were talking just before we came into this recording just about the fact that some of us were new to the organizations we're in. So we decided that we would talk kind of more generally about the practice and what we've observed as, I guess, professionals who've worked in this area for quite some time. I've been through a number of lockdowns like most people around the world, and it's been interesting to see organizations turn to data and analytics for help. The way you would expect in a crisis, people are wanting to see more clearly and maybe more sooner what's going on, and they're asking different questions than they would normally have asked. So it has been a case, like most parts of an organization, where we've had to mobilize around the needs of the business and react to some different drivers, like as I said, that the need to see things in different parts of our operations potentially than we've looked at before, and the need to know sooner about what's happening. So that's certainly been a trend that I've observed. Another interesting observation I think I've made over the last couple of years has been the shift towards using human intuition a bit more and validating some of that using data before you test and learn and market again. And I've seen situations where traditionally you would have used historical data to run some analysis to predict. And now we're in a situation where we're kind of in uncharted territories for a lot of our businesses. And sometimes it's down to what our people, our leaders think may happen, and then just using some data algorithms to look at whether that might be the case from a data perspective. The data seems to bear that out. But only when we go in and try it in small scale do we actually see whether it holds true or not. And then my view is that once you do find something that is working, even in these volatile times, as long as customers are benefiting from it, and it isn't impacting our risk position, and it's helping the bank achieve its objectives in this case, then I'm not really too fussy about whether it came from a data scientist or whether it came from somebody who's sitting in the business for quite a long time. So it's been really interesting to see the organization value data and analytics even more, and to be able to react to that and to assist them in understanding which customers potentially need more help than others at certain times, and to try and understand what way we think the market may be going. It's been really, really interesting.
Thanks. David, what have you seen in your area of energy?
So a couple of things that Pete touched on. Certainly that notion of forecasting and thinking about where things are going, that horizons have shortened and there's more test and learn, and how does that play out? I'm sorry to say, probably many of this, the first thing we experienced was everyone going, what does it mean for targets? And can we reset targets? And what does that look like? And how does that play out? And what's the board going to ask? And all those normal questions around, we've got skin in the game on this, how's the world moved? And I think that was just, we went through that phase of sense making, and so often data and analytics is heavily involved in that process. And historically I've been involved in teams where they've talked about cues and clues, and I think that's to what Pete speaks about, that you're looking for genuine evidence and clues that things are going in a certain way, but sometimes it's your cues and it's your head and your gut that influence how things going. And I think those conversations have moved more conscious than they ever have been in the past. Probably the second wave I experienced is when you work for a large organisation, there's pretty quickly a conversation about customer hardship and really ramping up in that area, and the use of data and analytics, particularly around lead management, early signs of customer hardship. How can we intervene strongly in that place to help our customers out? And that one's powerful because so many people in that uncertain time are looking for that purpose, and how do we make sure we're looking after our customers? Probably the one that it was part of the full reset for me is I've got research teams, and completely different world if you can't do face-to-face research, or the researchers were out looking at LPG delivery journeys where they're on trucks with drivers delivering bottles. You can't do that in a post-COVID world, and so much of the numbers and the data and whether you're looking for a causal relationship or whatever it is, you often need that face-to-face and that research to go, and this is the why. And we've had many conversations about we need to reset about how we talk about why.
Terry, do you want to weigh in from your experiences?
Yeah, I think the most obvious thing that kind of happened to me and my team is, and we inevitably working on multiple projects in parallel because we deliver solutions to customers, and we quite instantly found that the composition of teams and data teams and how they work together actually expanded. So in the past, teams used to work from offices in a room, and most of the communication was kind of face to face. And suddenly, the team composition inevitably is global, literally. So in a team, there's just and you land up building the relationships and the team-to-team dynamics of people who are not necessarily in your close circle of team, but are in distant ends of the world or ends of our continent, if not others. So that very much changed the dynamics. It kind of made it actually harder to form relationships with those close to you, but it also made it easier to form relationships with those far away from you. So that was a real two-edged blade that we kind of still coming to grips with. So that's more on the human side, of course. In terms of the data side, what I've found is that the general public and their demand for data is just up to notch. So people now expect and everyone's an expert in data. They see these graphs every day at 11 a.m. in Sydney for the past year. And the graph says how many are double dosed, single dosed, how many are this, how it's trailing this, what the R factor is and reproduction. People know these things now, and they really expect to have the statistics of yesterday, today, and they just don't accept anything but that. So when the general public has accepted that, our managers, our ministers, everything is controlling what we do, has the same expectation. So really a big up-notched in terms of expectation of data delivery.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I work in health data science myself, and so we've seen that very closely. Everyone's now an expert in the health system and in all the data around the health system, as you point out. So there's all sorts of appetite, and that knowledge, I think, is really powerful. That people are actually getting first-hand experience on what it means to use data to make decisions. That are pretty significant for individuals and society.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to follow that up a bit further in terms of just thinking at any areas that have really accelerated as a result of COVID. So what are the either digital or analytics trends that have really been pushed forward? So we've mentioned one in terms of public expectations. Are there any others that come to mind in terms of that expectation?
I think non-relational databases is on an increase. It was beforehand, but now like graph databases that analyze relationships. I mean, that's of course pivotal in health, where you're seeing who contacted who and who contacted who, and you joining dots. So that's very much becoming mainstream. And together with that, the general inclination of people to accept new technologies and do things differently, overall, the appetite for that has increased. So that's accelerating adoption of new data strategies. And graph data has been one that we've noted.
I think in banking, it's pretty obvious that people have had to go digital that maybe didn't want to be digital before, right? So in some of the banks I've worked in, a heavy emphasis quickly on people who may struggle to make that conversion happen. And obviously that was really, really empowering for some of the customers that would have been less likely to take up those services. But obviously as well, an explosion in things like contactless payments has happened. It's just become the absolute norm now. And then, we've all experienced it, right? Remote working is the new norm. So people have had to adjust. And I think Terry was starting to talk about that. It's been really interesting to observe the rhythms that we've had to build our teams around, and their ability to participate in stand-ups that are entirely virtual. I think in the organization I'm in now, we have already got a geographically diverse team. And as I've mentioned before the call, half of my team is located in Wellington anyway. So based here in Auckland, sometimes when we were thinking about how will we have an all-hands session, well, it's always been the case that half the team will be in Auckland or Wellington. So, we haven't really skipped a beat. But I think some organizations have found that quite a lurch to move from basically being all together to now being working in a remote context. And certainly organizations I've heard of have now started to really question what is the workplace for, and what are the things that we're constrained in doing remotely that we would want to bring people together for, and why do we think that an organization needs to provide that? Why don't we empower people to just do that themselves as well? So been really interesting. I think particularly in the area of doing data work, it has been a challenge where we would be looking to embed people more into teams when they're physically approximated next to some of the SMEs. It can have an amazing effect on how they collaborate. And when everybody's geographically dispersed and you're fighting for time and diaries and trying to build teams virtually, you're down to that again traditional kind of challenge of trying to build rapport and build relationships and learn new ways of working while everybody's learning to adjust to being remote. So it's been a fascinating shift where those digital trends have collided with company culture, and I think a lot of us are feeling the same impacts.
I think a couple of things I'd build on that, particularly with the audience that's watching this today, those dynamics about how do you get close to the business and understand the business. And so much, and particularly in the analytics work we do, context counts. That, you know, it's how do you bounce off the people around you, and trying to do that virtually. And I'm sure we've all experienced people joining the team and people leaving the team. That we've been in and out of these lockdowns for so long, and when you're going to an operating model like this where so much is virtual, you just don't have the mature processes that so often it's ad hoc or heroic behaviour is involved in forming some of those relationships. So trying to think about that consciously, and even going through some of the etiquette stuffs around putting your hands up in a virtual meeting and what does that look like, and giving everyone the opportunity to contribute and jump in, and making sure your facilitation of the meetings is just that much stronger, I think, in some of the virtual, or more prescriptive in some of the virtual environments to get the voices heard. And the other one, which is less about the soft skills and more about some of the prescription that the likes of our roles bring to the room, has been, as we've seen this growth in digitalisation and increased demand for lead management, particularly from sales teams, and what does that look like? It's where some of our governance standards become that much more important, whether it's data governance or the ethics on AI use, or just testing some of those boundaries has probably accelerated a little bit faster than people anticipated. That if you think about digitalisation and data governance almost going in hand at their growth rates, probably it wasn't. Your data governance maturity has had to move a lot quicker than probably people thought it was going to have to 2 years ago. Like it seemed like a very predictable, steady roadmap, and boy, she's moved fast.
Yeah, so that sort of crisis mode causing us to just have to do things obviously creates potential risks. It also creates potential opportunities. I wonder if you want to expand a little bit on the, what mistakes we might have made because we had to make them so quickly versus opportunities we suddenly grabbed that we thought were going to take a long time. Any sort of observations from that sort of dealing with the crisis mode and what it's like to lead in that environment?
I think the area we've found it, or I've found it most challenging, is sequencing. So not everyone's moving at the same speed, and I think Leeds is a good example. I'll come back to the Leeds example. We're an environment where we had people knocking on doors. And that's obviously not happening anymore. So what do those teams do, and how does that work? And all of a sudden, there's this thirst for, we have people that actually want to sell our story to potential customers or retain existing customers. How do you do that? And getting the sequencing right on, here's the lead, here's the governance, here's how it interacts with the other leads, here's the customer contact rules. At the same time, particularly as you're doing a platform change out, and we've partway through migrating our contact center platform as well, coordination and sequencing has just, it does keep you awake at night. How do you make sure that you're getting those where you are effectively flexing your processes, and the processes drive some of the downstream data movement and the way you capture and the way people behave? So how do you keep up with that in as close to near time as you can and flow it through the organisation?
Any other observations on that sort of dealing with the crisis and either opportunities that were missed?
Yeah, I think a huge concern for me is how you maintain team and individual well-being during this. we have people who have every circumstance you can imagine, right, to deal with, as well as trying to continue their work. So it's not conducive at all to building a culture when people can't congregate. And as David was saying, a lot of the success of analytics in particular thrives on how you collaborate and how you are, visibly there with the customer, in this case, a business person trying to impact their business in a positive way. So a huge focus has been, to overplay almost this caring and well-being approach, because we've got to support the fact that it's very difficult to build a culture when everybody is dispersed and no one has the opportunity to come together. Now, there are some people who like that, but the majority of human beings have that social muscle, and they want to be with peers, and you miss out on the casual conversation pieces. So a really conscious shift and learning for everybody. Me more than just like everybody else, I've had to learn how to lead a large team this way under these circumstances, and try to reinforce and build culture. So just like every other leader in the organization I'm in, that's new. And as David said, the really critical part of success hinges on building those relationships and building rapport and maintaining trust that you've built with people by being around them and being empathetic to what they care about and what they're trying to achieve, and how what you bring helps them with that. So it's been a massive focus for me, and I wouldn't have predicted how much of my time is spent on that leading into this. I've grown as a leader from it, and I've really valued learning those things. But I guess I've woken up to that as part of this challenge. I'd be interested in the other panelists' thoughts about that.
I think there's a nuance too in leading people in different levels of lockdown.
Yeah.
That when you've got part of your team in New Zealand language level 2 and part in level 3 or part in level 4, the way you do that, you talk about growth as a leadership, that plays.
Yeah, we've very much found that things that are more commonly done through building rapport and relationships is where you had the greatest impacts, and a lot of people that in the past actually took more of a back seat have come forward to the front seat. So we're seeing that as well. But certainly in the normal course of business, you would go to a customer and you more in the planning stages where there's actually a bit of a negotiation going on, and you'd go and have a meeting or a workshop or something like that, and you discuss, and parties have their own kind of views on things, and that discussion sometimes was productive, sometimes not, and then everyone would say, okay, now we're going to take a break, and everyone steps aside and offers each other a biscuit and has a little chew on the biscuit and asks them if they have any kids, and 10 minutes later they're back in the room. Now that tiny little interaction, no one thinks of it twice, but you take that away and it just makes the whole job harder. So that it just makes all the parties far harder to reach consensus, reach agreement, and to see things from the other person's point of view. It's just human nature. So I think that again, I'm not sure how you would term that, kind of mental health of an organisation, organisational mental health. That's had a price.
I guess the thing we can take from this as a challenge too is how do we bring data to that problem, right? So leaders are looking to me in the bank to help them find out more about well-being and try to find new things to measure to get a better understanding of the impact of having to work remotely, and keeping collaboration and keeping engagement, and how do we influence engagement. And we spoke about the why earlier. I think David called it out as a big thing, but understanding why people suffer through working remotely is huge. So there are a whole new set of whys associated with working in this way that leaders are turning to us to help them understand, so that they can take some action to positively improve it. So again, we're turning our attention to trying to measure things that we never would have guessed mattered as much, but they've been so amplified by these new ways of working. And David also mentioned, stress, and obviously in the customer base of our organizations, we can be alert to identifying trends and at least responding and looking to see who else is suffering from those that have already put up their hand, but trying to get ahead of some of the consequences of these lockdowns is interesting too. So I wonder that would be something we could probably explore too, would be the influence we can have on macroeconomic factors and those points of stress in the economy and in our customer bases.
Yeah, I'm curious if any of you have experienced sort of a change in more the technical side as well, in terms of the type of analytics. And we'll talk about those areas that we now are researching and evaluating on behalf of our businesses and our customers that we didn't even think of before. And I think it might have been you, Terry, I think you mentioned sort of graph databases as an example of an area that suddenly there's been an expansion because it's all about relationships and things like that. I'm curious, because we've got largely a data science sort of analytics audience, if there's other examples of sort of particular technical areas that are becoming more accessible and what we're learning through those experiences.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the fact that people have kind of surrendered the absolute belief that the past dictates the future. I think people have now surrendered that, or they simply look at the past not only in terms of the last 10 years, but they look at it from a generational perspective. So that has changed the lens on which we use to project things. So it was interesting to hear Pete earlier say, I think it was Pete, that to a large extent, the senior experienced people at the company have a view or belief and then look for data to back that up. And that's that's a two-edged blade, of course, but that's happening quite a lot, and maybe more so. Maybe people are more inclined to put data to the test and to say, does the data outcomes back our beliefs than maybe they did before? And also at the same time, they're prepared to take new chances on new things and to say, okay, this could happen or that could happen, and therefore acting differently is appropriate rather than just acting the way we always have.
There's probably a couple I'd add in around shifts as well. The first one, and I hope no one from Genesis is watching, but you wouldn't put as much stock on some of your customer lifetime value models and using those to make decisions. Those horizons are a wee bit funky at the moment, and the factors that underpin them probably need a revisit. One I've been pleasantly surprised in is we've probably accelerated some of our natural language processing around feedback from customers, complaints, verbatims, just starting to get into, now that we're replatforming, starting to get into the contact center calls, that the near-time conversations with customers, I think, can influence decisions more than they used to, and because you can apply some data science grunt to it, that appetite has grown. That would be an area where I think I've certainly seen a little bit of a shift.
I agree. I mean, I think this has accelerated our need to. I talk about two duties that I think we have around data. One of them is a duty of care, which is pretty self-evident, right? We need to protect the data that we look after on behalf of the customer. But there's also this duty of confidence that we hold with our customer. I mean, the customers expect us to do good things with the data for their benefit, right? So in the case of situations like this, I think it is incumbent on us to look for areas of stress in the data. I mean, we are human too. So when you deal with so much uncertainty and complexity, it's very difficult to use. I think I've mentioned already, to use and rely upon prediction, because prediction is based on learning from historical data. So now we're in this situation where we're relying upon testing and learning at pace, and we're trying to discover hotspots in near real time and then extrapolate out from those and see whether or not they're indicating a pattern in certain groups, or they are indicators of different things that may happen from what's happening now. So it is amplifying that need to get ahead of, if we can at all, and rely upon the judgment of human beings again, because prediction is based on history, and we're in very unprecedented times. So I think we have to step up, and we have been stepping up big time to try and meet that challenge. But it is a big one, and some of it goes against the traditional approach of data people, which is to measure and count things and then just run some nice clean models that extrapolate out. I mean, we are dealing with levels of complexity and uncertainty that blow a lot of that work away. So but it's an exciting space to be in. Don't get me wrong; it's really really interesting because of what we're discovering and the correlations that we find, and the new things we measure now forever that we never knew really mattered before. Is really really interesting work. So I think as data professionals, we're entering into a new and exciting area of acceleration, and it is down to that again combination of unlocking human intuition and validating through data and experimentation, and that stuff's really really interesting to me.
Yeah, another area that I thought someone might bring up is the sort of open sourcing nature of a lot of the work that we can do now. And again, I've seen that in health a lot. There's all sorts of data now publicly released and therefore available for benchmarking against different countries and building models and all sorts of things, all the way through to things like how do you monitoring social media for trends in information and disinformation and all these sorts of things. And I think there's a whole lot of methodologies around these things that are evolving that will become part of our toolkit as analytics and data science professionals going forward. We're just starting to realize the relationships between different sectors and different jurisdictions and all these sorts of things. So I feel like there's lots of people who kind of had a taste of what this data can tell us.
I have more of a question that might I'd be interested to hear what others think, and that is, are the public generally more inclined to have their data used and shared than they were in the past? So I think I think there's so much privacy legislation, and we'll go so far to protect privacy that goes without saying verbatim. But actually, are we spending all that time and effort to protect privacy because of the 0.1% of people that want their privacy, where 99% actually are quite happy to share a lot of their data? I'm posing that as a question rather than a statement.
I've lots of views on that, but I'm interested in maybe David giving a view. He looks keen.
Yeah, I think privacy and data protection is often a point in time thing, and there is an awareness you gain, I think, working in our field, which certainly had an impact on me, and I was more sensitive how my data was used. But I think that's an awareness, and it's almost, and I've used the analogy before around, is it a learning curve, some sort of sigmoid curve, that effectively the conversations at the moment are moving us up and down a curve rather than refocusing it. But I'm very mindful as the noise generates, particularly in the use of social data and feeds into people's social networks, how that influences not only short-term decisions, but I think there will be a generational thing, and we're already seeing it to an extent, where people will become more sensitive to their data. And I'm in in my mind, a situation where I'm looking at customer analytics, but I look over the fence at the people in HR analytics, and boy, they're ramping up their governance at the moment and want to be really, really secure. And we have situations where, as an energy provider, we have fiduciary responsibilities to particularly continuity of service, where there's health machines involved that a power generation can be life-threatening. Now, we don't particularly want to make that data public, and would always choose not to, but it's got to drive the right behaviours. And I think, unfortunately, with privacy and people being exposed by privacy, and this is a really bad example to use after the health one, but you almost need to be burnt to gain that awareness that, oh no, I do have an opinion on that. So I think there's a natural progression for people that as they understand more, they become more sensitive to it, but they're willing to make trade-offs. And I'm just not quite sure where we're on in that curve at the moment. And some of it's about individuals, I'm sure.
I agree. I think it is very much down to the literacy of the person that is being asked the question, will you share, or can we share your data? I think there's often a misstep, which is explaining to a customer the benefit to them of entering into a data agreement or participating in a data share. We often just talk about, enabling functionality, but we don't really explain the consequences behind it. So as an example, just my own personal view, this isn't the view of the organization I represent, but I bank with ANZ, and they hold arguably some of my most precious information. Well, I'd be really keen to give them more of my information if it meant I could get another quarter point off my mortgage, right? I kind of have to trust them already, and I do. So I'd love to know what the bank is going to do for me to help me grow my wealth through the use of my data. And I trust that they'll do that in safe ways, and they're heavily regulated. But I will enter into more and more of that with them, as long as they can tell a really good story to me of the benefit to me of doing that, right? So I think it's setting up that conversation. I think the society is warming up a little bit to it, but it has been, to David's point, has been burned a bit as well. So it is a very, very carefully orchestrated conversation that needs to happen before customers will continue down that path or go up that curve, as David articulated so well.
But Terry and Kevin, you guys are both health data.
Yeah.
You do it.
Yeah, well, Pete, I mean, to Pete's point, that same conversation in health is huge. Will we share more of our health data in order to benefit society in certain ways? And overwhelmingly, the answer is actually yes. If you ask individuals, especially if you ask someone who has the same condition as you, or has a particular condition, would you share that data to benefit others with the same condition? Overwhelmingly, the answer is yes, and we assume that you do it already. However, there's always the other side of that, is those of us who understand the data realize all the things that could go wrong with sharing that, and therefore it often doesn't get shared because of the risks. I think that was an excellent point that Pete just made, that we need to be really good at telling the good news story. So we need to be out there with, because we're good at analytics, we're making these decisions better. And again, health's had quite a good opportunity to do that really visibly in the last couple of years, but I think that goes a bit universally as well. I think we're coming up towards our time. I wonder if we'd go around the room and have a a final sort of thought on, I'm curious to know, actually, a question I was going to ask is whether your analytics and data teams have grown through this crisis, and I sort of want to expand that slightly to give you summarize, what's happened and what sort of roles do you see growing in the future? What do you see that sort of the next couple of years looking like for those of us who lead data and analytics teams? Pause to think about it.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, our teams pretty much stayed static throughout the pandemic, and now we're seeing opportunities, and we are in fact hiring, so we're expanding. So I think yes, there's been an increase in analytics. The data science and data scientists been a bit of a key phrase almost that just overtook the world in the last 2 to 3 years. But I think now people are starting to understand what a data scientist actually is and what they actually do. And what data engineering is, which is a little bit different, and what a computer programmer is and how that's a little bit different too. I think all those words were just blended together at one point. I think now it's matured. People understand what it is. So I think very much the data science industry has matured. It's all built into teams in a reasonably consistent way. We've now worked that out. So I think that's been a milestone. Yeah, and I think from what I've seen at customer sites is their data teams have expanded enormously. So, if I look at the Australian government in general, without going to the specifics of the organisations we work for, and just last week I saw a data team in the Australian government go quadruple in size within a short period of time. So absolutely, there's a lot of data work going on.
Agree. I think it's an amazing career for people to get involved in if they aren't already. There are so many opportunities for you to find your niche, even within something that would have been considered niche 20, 30 years ago. It's so broad now. The range of roles that we're seeing come through, people have kind of moved off the data science and into data storytelling being a huge thing of late, right? And who knows where we'll go. It's interesting, your commentary, and I think I'd agree. I think organizations, the build I would make on it is that I think organizations have learned how to use data science now more than they've got their heads around what it is. They've actually learned how to implement that part of understanding and learning your business. And I've made quite a distinction in our team around the difference between counting things, how many, which ones, where, who, when, and discovering why things are happening, and the rhythms and the tools and techniques used to unearth why questions are very, very different to the ones that we use to count things at high precision economically, so to speak. So that's been a really interesting area of growth for us. And in my experience of it in the last 2 to 3 years, the rate of growth in companies' investment in data and analytics is accelerating. And companies are recognizing more and more that it's the price of doing business. But if you get it right, you can do so much more with that data to grow your business. Not only give a good account of yourself, but you can also find new ways to grow if you do it right. There's some amazing talent in data in New Zealand, and a lot of it is drawn to this beautiful country. So if you are in data and you're in New Zealand, that's a really a double advantage for you. And I'd encourage people to seek new opportunities in data wider, and not to be too concerned about trying to fit a particular role now. I would just be trying to think about the things you enjoy, and then by the time you've moved your career forward a little bit, those types of roles will become more and more obvious to organizations that that's what we need to hire for. So it's a very exciting time to be in data, I think.
Yeah, I'd probably use a couple of analogies to describe where we're at. I'd certainly encourage people to get into data and analytics at the moment. And to me, it's like putting the boat where the wind's blowing. It's an area that's going to grow for a period of time, and particularly if you've got an interest, a curious mind, wanting to unpick problems, it's a great area to be in. If I talk about the growth in our team, we're doing a data migration, so the team's a lot bigger, but by definition, because we're in something. But there's a wonderful expression that a senior leader in our organisation uses, that insight is in the eye of the beholder. And it speaks to, and I think, Kevin, you touched on it earlier, there's more language now around data and expectations on data. And I think part of the role with the analyst in the business is this creating this virtual cycle where you're getting the constant pull. And what does that look like? So I think as our audience becomes more sophisticated, it will cause our analysts to become more sophisticated. It's how do you create that cadence and that momentum and then keep it going. That's the tough bit for some of our roles, and make sure it's actually actioned, because if it's just interesting, not action, well, we probably haven't done our job.
Well said. I think one of the summaries here is, as of about a year or two ago, all our models were wrong, and yet somehow we've grown in the need and desire to do more of this. So we're in a pretty good position as a result of it. Hey, so thank you all very much. Pete, David and Terry, you've had some great things to say, and I'm sure the audience will enjoy viewing this session. Thanks again to the organisers for the CDAO event. I hope you're all enjoying this conference virtually.
Thank you so much to Kevin Ross, the board member for New Zealand Data and Analytics Forum, and all of our panellists for contributing to such an interesting and timely discussion just now.